So I'm going to go through number 5 with you. If you have it done, check your answer. If not, then lucky you. It's your lucky day. We're going to go through it together. So looking at this one, first of all, we see it's the difference of two perfect cubes. So we're just solving. Now on an ACT, it won't say use the sum or difference of two perfect cubes to solve. Like you're going to have to look at this and recognize I have two terms and they're both perfect cubes. Well, if you don't know if they're perfect cubes, take the cube root of both of them and see if you come out with something without a decimal. Now, let's say you come out with something as a decimal, you can't use this method. You got to use a different method, which we haven't learned yet. Okay? So first of all, let's factor this. Now, that little trick I taught you to factor, we'll go through it real quick. You need to find your front term. So you take the cube root of this front thing. So the cube root of 125, and what do I get? Okay, and then we ignore this negative for a minute because this is the difference of two perfect cubes, and we just take the cube root of x cubed, and then our root cancels out our power, leaving us with x. So this is our front, and this is our back. Now we can go through, I taught you how to factor this using a quick little trick. So you do your parentheses, and you put your front term in, and your back term, and then you look at the sign that you started with. Well, this was a negative, so this is going to be negative. And then our song begins. So we put our parentheses and our song begins. So we're doing, so the song goes like this. The front with the front and the front with the back. Then the back with the back. So let's go ahead and do the front with the front. 5 times 5. 25. Then we're doing the front with the back. 5x. We're not going to put it in our signs till last. And then we'll do the back with the back. X squared. Okay, good. Now we'll go through and fill in our signs. If this is minus, this will be positive, and this on the end is always positive. Very good. And now we'll go ahead and put it in standard form here. So we have negative x plus 5, negative x plus 5, and then we have right here x squared. It was positive. It's going to stay positive. Plus 5x, and then plus 25. Now, what if I asked you, and on the test, this is what I'm going to ask you to do. Factor and solve. So, we know that the whole point of factoring is so we can set linear factors equal to 0. So, right here, do we have a linear factor? Is it degree 1, guys? Yes, so we can set that equal to 0. So, we'll set negative x plus 5 equal to 0, and then we'll set this piece equal to 0. So, x squared plus 5x plus 25, we'll set that also equal to 0. Now we'll solve for x in each case. Over here, we're trying to get x alone. So I'm going to subtract 5. So we have negative x is equal to negative 5. And then x isn't completely alone. What do we need to do? Divide both sides by negative 1. So our negatives divide out, and we have x is equal to what's negative 5 divided by negative 1. Positive 5. There's one of our answers. We know there's going to be 3 because we started with a cubic equation. Now looking at this, it's quadratic, degree 2. Can we just quickly simplify it? Can we just quickly solve for this? We can't do it quickly. It's going to take us a minute. So we can solve by factoring if it's factorable, or we can solve by the quadratic formula. So I'm going to use, it's not factorable, so I'm going to use the quadratic formula. So we know, we can finish this one off. X equals negative b plus and minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c. Now everybody watch this. This is interesting. All over 2a. Not just partially over 2a, it's all over 2a. So let's hurry and detect a, b, and c. So a is equal to what? Guys, what's a equal to? Okay, and b is equal to 5, and c is equal to 25. Any questions on where I got a, b, or c? I think we're all pretty comfortable with that by now. So plugging it in, we're doing the opposite of b here. So the opposite of positive 5 is negative 5. So we have negative 5 plus and minus the square root of b squared. B is 5, so 5 squared minus 4 times a is 1, times c is 25. And that's all, not just that piece, it's all over 2 times a, and that's 2 times 1, right? Keep going. Let's keep going. So we have -5 plus or minus the square root. Now careful. Now I still see people messing up with this. This is +5 squared, but even if it was -5 squared, what would we get? 25. Anything squared is positive. Now this is where still some people are kind of double dipping with their negatives. If you type it into your calculator as such, if you type it in as -4 times 1 times 25, you accounted for the negative with the 4. So you've got to go with the sign you get when you get an answer. So let's practice typing it in this way. -4 times 1 times 25. Tell me if we get a positive or minus answer. And tell me what you get. Negative what? -100. You're right. So we get -100. So you guys don't say we're subtracting 100. We're not. We accounted for the negative with our 4. So since we got -100, we'll put in -100. Questions on that? And then that's all over 2 times 1, which is over 2. So we have -5 plus and minus the square root. What's 25 minus 100? -75 all over 2. Continuing to simplify. -5 plus and minus. Oh, wait. Okay. So now this is where we go up to the side and say, can this piece simplify any further? So I'm going to go over here. The square root, the square root of -75. Well, remember a few things, guys. This is the same thing as the square root of -1 times 75. So let's break down 75. What times y equals 75? 5 times 15, okay. 5 times 15, and 15 breaks down into 5 times 3, and these are prime factors. So we're done. We're pulling out groups of, and unless there's 2, they've got to stay under the house. There's 2 5s right there, so we'll pull out a 5. Not 5 times 5, we'll pull out a 5 for those 2 5s. And then we need to pull out this -1, and what comes out? I. And then what's left? Square root of 3. So guys, this red piece, 5i squared to 3, is this. Now, common errors, guys, I'm seeing people, so that's that. I'm seeing people bring this 5i and put it in with this. It's not. It was after the plus and minus sign, so don't make that error. So what we have is -5 plus and minus 5i square roots of 3 all over 2. Don't magically grab this and float it over here. It's not. Okay? Oh, down here. Gotcha. Okay, yes, you're right. It's 2. Thank you. Okay, thank you. So then from here, guys, can you ever divide something under a root with something not? No. So we just ignore that. We leave that alone no matter what, even if that would have been square root of 2. Now we look at all 3 terms. This, and this, and see if there's something in common that can simplify and divide out. Is there in this problem? No. So there's 2 of our answers. There's 2 of our x values, -5 plus 5i squared to 3 over 2, and -5 minus 5i squared to 3 over 2. And then our third answer was x is equal to what? Well, back up here. X is equal to +5. So we have 3 answers, 1, 2, 3. Okay, guys, so these problems are a little bit involved. We just got to be careful, though. Not necessarily super hard now that you know how to do them, all right? They are tedious, though. They are a little bit tedious, and you have to be really careful. Okay, let's move on to the new stuff. So today we're going to learn a new technique we're going to see some things we've never seen before, and we're going to learn a new technique on how to solve these polynomials, okay? Now, it's super important that you pay attention to the little details on little things today, because on the test, I'm not going to say use factoring by grouping, or I'm not going to tell you how to do it. You're going to have to look at the polynomial and say, you know what? With that polynomial, I'm probably going to factor by grouping. Or I'm going to use a sum or difference of 2 perfect cubes, or so on and so forth. So we'll just go through, but like I said, I'll teach you on what to look for, and you'll be good. So today we're going to be factoring by grouping. Now, once again, the reason we factor is so that we can find the zeros. So the whole point of factoring is so that we can find the zeros. Now, we're dealing with way higher order. Now you saw that we reviewed quadratics at the beginning of the year, and now we're getting into the good stuff. Okay? So now today we're going to learn how to factor by grouping. Now, why would we use grouping? The only time we use grouping is if we're going to have 4 terms. So we're going to factor by grouping, and the only time you'll use grouping is if you have 4 terms. So that's very important. On the test, you'll have to recognize with your eyes, I see 4 terms, I'm going to probably use grouping. Now understand, it must be in standard form. Now remember, standard form means the highest degree, then the next highest degree, then the next, then the next. So if we have 4 terms, we're probably going to choose factoring by grouping. Now we'll always choose factoring by grouping. We'll try it, but there's one thing you need to understand. I had my Westlake student send me an email a couple days ago saying, Ms. Christensen, we don't understand our test. Can you make a video and we can watch it so we understand? And I noticed, and they sent me a picture of their test. I saw what they were doing wrong, made a video for them, and I noticed there was a problem on their test where there was 4 terms, and they tried factoring by grouping, but the factoring by grouping didn't work. So just because there's 4 terms doesn't mean that you're going to use grouping if it doesn't work. And I'll explain in a minute. Okay, I'll explain in a minute. Here we go. All right, so looking at our first example, we'll just get right into it. 6b cubed minus 16b squared plus 21b minus 56 is equal to 0. Now I promise I'm going to explain what I just said in just a second so that you're like, well, you just said if there's 4 terms, factor by grouping. And yes, you'll always try that first. Okay? So notice, guys, I would get this one down for your notes. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. It's in standard form and it's set equal to 0. So we can begin. Now, because there's 4 terms, I'm always going to try very first factoring by grouping. So this is how factoring by grouping works. You're going to say, I'm going to group the first 2 terms, and I'm going to group the second 2 terms. Any questions up to there? Now it's just like regular old factoring. You're going to like this. It's like regular old factoring. Just like we did with quadratics. You'll focus on each group one at a time, and you'll factor out everything you have in common from that group. So looking at 6b cubed minus 16b squared, we've got to factor out the greatest thing we have in common. What do they both have in common in the numbers? How about 6? Let's start with 6 and 16. What do they both divide by? They both divide by 2. So let's pull out a 2. Good. Now looking at b cubed and b squared, what's the greatest thing we have in common with our b's? B squared. So we're pulling out 2b squared. Now we need to write what's left inside the parentheses after we pull out 2b squared from each term. So we're going to put our parentheses. Now a lot of us have a really hard time with seeing what's left. Even I do sometimes. So guess what I do? My little trick. Here we go. I go back through and say, okay, we pulled out a 2b out of b squared out of each term. So we divided out 2b squared out of each term. Now when you write it like this, so you can see what's left, it's a lot easier to see what's left. Okay? So let's think about this. Let's go through and simplify this. What's 6 divided by 2? 3. What's b cubed divided by b squared? V. Now was that pretty easy to get what was left in the terms? Biggest trick to help you in your future of factoring. Okay, moving on to this next term here. We just took care of that. 16, well, it's negative 16 divided by 2. Negative 8, very good. Negative 8. And then b squared divided by b squared. It's not 0, but it's 1. Anything divided by itself is 1. So that really kind of, I don't like to say it cancels out, it divides out and becomes 1. Do we need to write 8 times 1? Let's just write 8. And we close our parentheses. Any questions on factoring of that first group? Okay, moving on to my next group. Now I'm going to focus on this group, ignoring all this stuff, and let's factor out everything we have in common. So we have 21b minus 56. We want the greatest thing in common. This one's a little bit trickier. Somebody said 7. Good, very good. They both have a 7 in common, so we're going to pull out a 7. So let's write what's left. Now remember, if you don't know, go back through and divide each thing by 7 to see what was left. So 21 divided by 7 is 3, and we still have our b. And then negative 56 divided by 7, negative 8. All right, so now check your safe haven. That's the nice thing about this little safe haven. It better be the same inside the parentheses. Is that the same as that? Yes, so we're safe. We're safe. So we're going to pull out our safe haven, just like we did with regular old factoring. So we pull out our safe haven. So 3b minus 8. When we pull it out, it divides out of each term. Then we're going to write what we have left. Right here, what do we have left? 2b squared. And then right here was positive 7. Positive 7. So we have our plus 7 left. Now that we've factored this, the whole point of factoring is to set your factors equal to 0 and solve. Does everybody understand how to factor this? Okay. Now let me make a point. So remember how I said, okay, my Westlake students emailed me, they said, I tried factoring by grouping, but it didn't work, and they were right. They had a problem on there that didn't work. So what had happened, guys? They got the right idea. They said, okay, I see I have 4 terms. They started to factor by grouping, and then guess what? Even though they factored correctly, their safe haven wasn't the same. And they kept going. If your safe haven's not the same, you can't factor by grouping. So you'll do a different method. We haven't learned that method yet. So now I'm telling you, if you have 4 terms, factor by grouping. We will learn in the future, though, if you were to come across something like this and you tried to factor by grouping and it didn't work, how to solve it. Does that make sense of when you can and can't? If you're not safe, you can't keep going. Okay, good. All right, so then from here, guys, we'll set each of our factors equal to 0. 3b minus 8 is equal to 0. That's a linear factor. Good, because linear factors are easy. I'm going to go through and set this equal to 0 as well. So we have 2b squared plus 7 is equal to 0. Any questions? I'm setting each of my factors equal to 0 and continuing to solve. This one's easy. It's linear, so it's easy. We'll add 8 to both sides. So that leaves me with 3b is equal to 8. And then to get b along, we'll divide both sides by 3. So we get b is equal to, I don't like decimals, 8/3. b is equal to 8/3. Now, if you could simplify that, you would need to. So you could type it into your calculator. 8 divided by 3, hit enter, you'll get a decimal. Change it back to a fraction, and it will put it back in 8/3. So you know it's for sure in the most simplified answer. There's one of my roots. Now, looking at this one, we have 2b squared plus 7. It's quadratic, so you could solve by the quadratic formula if you wanted. There's an easier way. I'm not going to use the quadratic formula in this one. Now, what would your b value be if you decided to go for the quadratic formula here? b would be 0. Well, that would be fine. You can do that if you'd like. I'm going to show you a different way to do this one that's quicker. Are you ready? Now, you've seen this before. Now, notice in this one, we're missing bx, or we have 0x, right? We're missing the middle term. Remember how to solve those. Isolate x squared, and then take the square root. So let's get b squared all by itself. So I'm going to subtract 7. So I have 2b squared is equal to negative 7. Now, b squared is still not by itself yet, so what do? Good, divide both sides by 2. So then I have b squared is equal to negative 7 over 2. Now, to get b along, we'll take the square root of both sides. So then our root cancels out our power, and we have b is equal to, and we know that when solving, you have to add the plus and minus in front. We have the plus and minus of the square root of negative 7 over 2. Now, if you do this using the quadratic formula, you'll already have this in the correct form. But we are not finished. We can't leave it like this because we got to keep simplifying, guys. So looking at this, just remember a few things. We have plus and minus. Now, we have the square root of both of those things. So you have to split it up. We have the square root of negative 7 on top, and on bottom we have the square root of 2. Is everybody following me? I'm just splitting it up. Are we okay? Now, we have to go through and make this in the most simplified, prettiest form. Because, guys, this class is just, they wanted you to know how to put this in the most beautiful form. Like, this is getting you ready for calculus, this class is, okay? So we have to keep going with this. Now, we know how to rationalize denominators. Can we have a root in the bottom? Can we have a root in the denominator of a fraction? No. So we know how to fix it. We multiply the bottom by the square root of 2 and the top by the square root of 2. So then, what we have here is, on top we have, so we won't forget the plus and minus. On top we have the square root of negative 14. Now, if they're both under the root, you can multiply them both under the root. And on bottom we have the square root of 2 squared, right? 2 times 2 is 2 squared. So on bottom, our root cancels out our power. So I'm showing all my work, so I'm kind of being annoying. I'm going to go up here. Plus and minus, we have the square root of negative 14 over what? 2. Now we have to say, does any of the roots left over simplify further? So looking at this piece, can we simplify it further? Yes, we need to pull out a what? I. Very good. So we have plus and minus I square roots of, and then that's 7 times 2. Can we pull out a 7 or 2? No, so we're going to leave that underneath. So that'll be 7 times 2 left underneath. We pulled out the negative though and put a 9. And then that's all over 2. Now it's simplified. Now if you did the quadratic formula, you would have had 0 plus and minus this all over 2. Same thing, different ways of getting there. Okay, so there's 2 of our answers. And then our other answer was whatever we got, 8/3, right? B is equal to 8/3. If I remember right, I don't want to scroll back. 1, 2, 3 answers. Makes sense because in the beginning we had a cubic. Okay, now if you'd rather do the quadratic formula, by all means, go ahead. Okay, any questions? Okay, let's do one more factoring by grouping, and then I'll just do two more of different types, and I'm just going to let you work the rest of the time. Okay? So 4b cubed minus 12b squared minus 5b plus 15 is equal to 0. Now, once again, I'm telling you that your test that's coming up, which tomorrow's the test review, and then it's the test the next day, I will not say to you factor by grouping. You're going to have to look at this and say, I'm going to factor by grouping. Now, you know this because you'll count and say, well, in this one, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. So we have 4 terms, so we'll probably factor by grouping. I'm going to try that first. And if we get our safe haven good, we can continue. So we factor by grouping, once again, by grouping the first 2 terms. Now this one's interesting. Now stay with me because this one's very interesting. And we group the second 2 terms. We run into something a little different on this one, so stay with me, guys. So then we group our first 2 terms and we factor out everything we have in common. So what's in common here? Greatest thing in common. 4b squared. Very good. They both have a 4b squared. Now let's write what's left. Let's say you didn't know. Go back and write it. You're dividing both by 4b squared if that's what you pulled out. So 4 divided by 4 becomes 1. V cubed divided by v squared is v. So we're done with this first term. And then we have negative 12 divided by 4, which is negative 3. And then v squared divided by v squared is what? 1. Guys, v squared divided by v squared is 1. Okay, so 3 times 1 is 3. So I'm not going to write that. Questions on the first group? Okay, looking at the second group, we have something very interesting. I saw my Westlake students mess up on this, on their test that they sent me. Looking at this, negative 5b plus 15, what do we have in common? I like that you say we have a negative 5. Now remember, if you have a negative in front, right next to the parentheses, that's the only time you'll pull out a negative with your factor. Very important though. So does everybody understand when you pull out a negative? So we're going to pull out negative 5 and write what's left. Now once again, go through and divide each thing by negative 5. Negative 5v divided by negative 5 is just v. Very good. And then positive 15 divided by negative 5. Negative 3. Are we safe? So in this problem, we could use factoring by grouping. We're safe because those are exactly the same. So now we can pull out our safe haven. So we'll pull out v minus 3. Now when you pulled it out, it divided out. That left you with 4b squared. 4b squared minus 5. Is everybody following? Now we'll set our factors equal to 0 and solve. So v minus 3 is equal to 0. 4b squared minus 5 is equal to 0. And then we'll solve for v in each case. So I'm going to add 3. v is equal to 3. There's one of our answers. And then in this one's not too bad. Watch. We're missing b. We're missing b. So if you use the quadratic formula, that's fine. Your b is going to be 0. I'm going to do it the quicker way. So 4b squared, and I add 5 to both sides, which is equal to 5. And divide by 4. So we would have b squared is equal to 5 over 4. Then we take the square root of both sides. So we have b is equal to the plus and minus square root of 5 over 4. And then we'll split it up. b is equal to plus and minus the square root of 5 over the square root of 4. What is the square root of 4, guys? 2. So really we have plus and minus square root of 5 over 2. Do we need to fix anything? No, good. There's 2 of our answers, and we already have the other answer. B is equal to 3. We have our 3 answers. Any questions? Okay, last 2 examples of 2 different things. Like, they're the same thing, but different than factoring by grouping, and I'm going to let you work the rest of the time. All right. So x cubed minus 2x squared plus 5x is equal to 0. Let's see if we can factor by grouping. Do we have 1, 2, 3? Do we have 4 terms? No, we don't have 4 terms. Okay, so we can't factor by grouping. Now, is it quadratic in the beginning? Is it quadratic in the beginning? It's degree 3. Quadratic's degree 2. Our highest is degree 3. So it's not quadratic, so we can't solve this one right now by factoring. But what do you notice with the 3 terms? They have something in common, right? They have an x in common. So let's pull out an x. From the very beginning, let's pull out an x. Now let's go through and see what we have left in each term. So we divided each term by x. Let's write what we have left. What's x cubed divided by x? X squared. And then we have this piece. What does it simplify to be? Negative 2x. X squared divided by x is just x. We still have the negative 2. And then 5x divided by x is plus 5. All right, so now looking at this, we can set each of our factors equal to 0 and solve. So we have x is equal to 0, and we have this is equal to 0. And then we could solve each. X is equal to 0. Done. That is one of our answers. Don't miss that. Don't say x is equal to 0, so that's not an answer. It is. X is equal to 0. And then we can solve this one using the quadratic formula, or if it factors, we could use factoring. But I'm not going to go through. You guys are getting good at the quadratic formula. So I'm not going to go through and solve that one. Any questions on that? Last one. I'm going to let you work the rest of the time. 5x cubed minus 5x squared is equal to 25. Oh. 5x cubed minus 5x squared is equal to 25. Do we have a problem? Mayday, mayday in the very beginning. What? It's not in standard form because it's not equal to 0. So how can I get this 25 over here? I can't just put it over there. Good. Minus 25 from both sides of the equation. Now keep in mind, guys, over here on the left, you can't combine any of these things. They're not like terms. So I'm just going to write it prettier. 5x cubed minus 5x squared. And then it's minus 25. And now it's equal to, those add up to be 0. And now we fixed it, so we're good. We can continue from here. Oh. Okay, and I meant to put an X on that because otherwise we haven't learned how to solve this yet. Okay, so once again we have 1, 2, 3 terms, and we have something in common from the very beginning. It was obvious now that I messed it up. What's in common? An X, but what else? A 5 and an X. So let's pull out a 5 and an X and write what we have left inside. Now if you didn't know, go back through and divide each thing by 5x. 5 divided by 5. What's x cubed divided by x? X squared. Negative 5 divided by 5 is negative 1x. X squared divided by x, you're right, is x. So negative 1x. I'll just write the 1 in there for people. So negative 1x. And then what's negative 25 divided by 5? Negative 5. And then x divided by x is 1. Now we can set each of those equal to 0 and solve. Any more? I won't go through and solve it completely, but stay with me for a last second. So we'll set 5x equal to 0. We'll set x squared minus 1x or minus x minus 5 equal to 0. And in each case solve. Over here, we'll divide both sides by 5. So we get x is equal to 0 divided by 5 is 0. Now if 0 is on bottom, we would have to say undefined. But 0 is on top, it's okay to take 0 and divide by 5, it's 0. X is equal to 0 is one of our answers. And then right here, we could solve using the quadratic formula, or if it's factorable, factoring further. Now I want to quickly talk to you though, just really quick, because on an ACT, they might say just factor the polynomial. So from here, you have to keep factoring, not solving using the quadratic formula. So I think this one is factorable, so I'm going to go through and factor this part. Just a reminder, guys. So we're doing what multiplies to be a times c. Now this is the method for solving the quadratic, and adds up to be b. What's a? 1. What's c? negative 5. So 1 times negative 5 is negative 5, and b is negative 1. So then factors of 5. 1 times 5 are the only factors of 5. Oh, wait. Yeah, so this one didn't factor further. Dang it, I was hoping I wasn't thinking. This one doesn't factor further, so you would say done. You would have said done at factoring. But since it says solve, we could solve these in the quadratic formula. We'll have to do one next time where this factors further, and then go through it. But you guys know how to factor quadratics, right? That's all that counts. If it was factorable, we could factor. And then once we factor, we could set each of those equal to 0. But the quadratic formula always works. Okay, any questions? Now keep in mind, on accident, if you went through and did the quadratic formula and you got x is equal to 1, let's say an x is equal to, or plus and minus 1, let's say, for example, or let's say you got, let's say this. Let's say you went through on accident, because I think this will happen in the future. It actually happened to Jesse May the other day, and then he was able to work backwards, which was awesome. He went through and did the quadratic formula, and he's got x equal to 1 and x is equal to 3. And I was like, oh crap, but Jesse, it says to factor. And he's like, great, I have to go back and factor it all. But he can work backwards. If you got these as your answers, we know how to find the factors, right? We got to subtract 1, so we'd have x minus 1 is equal to 0. One of our factors would have been x minus 1, right? If we factored it down, if the root is 1, its factor must have been x minus 1. And then we could have worked backwards here, subtract 3. So we would have had x minus 3 is equal to 0. So let's say that you did that, then we know it factors. Does that make sense? Those are our factors working backwards. Yeah? We have talked about that a few times. Are we all okay? All right. So do the worksheet, finish her up. Okay, I want you working. Do not run off to your friend and just start chit-chatting. I will kick you out today. I will kick you right out of my classroom today if you do that. So on number 1, what do you got here? You got p is equal to negative 1/2, and then you also had p is equal to negative square root of 7 over 8. And then people are asking me, well, now what? So remember, you'll split it up and you'll rewrite it as the square root of negative 7 over the square root of 8. Now the problem is the square root of 8 on bottom. So we need to make that square root of 8 not a square root. So we'll multiply by the square root of 8 to the bottom and the top. So on top we have the square root of negative 56, because since they're both under the root, you can multiply them together. And on bottom, we have the square root of 64, which is 8. So then you go off to the side and say, I'm going to break down the square root of negative 56. We know that's the square root of negative 1 times 56. 56 breaks down into 8 times 7. 8 breaks down into 4 times 2, and 4 breaks down into 2 times 2. Now we're pulling out groups of 2. We have 2 2's right there. We can't pull out that 2. There's not another 2. We can't pull out the 7. We do pull out the negative 1. So what I circled, what I pulled out. I pulled out a 2 and a I, and then left underneath was the square root of 2 times 7, which is 14. So on top, now we're not finished. We had plus and minus on top. We just figured it out to be 2i square roots of 14 over 8. Now does 2 and 8 divide? Does 2 and 8 divide? Yes. 2 divided by 2 becomes 1. 8 divided by 2 becomes 4. So we have plus and minus I square roots of 14 all over 4. You can't, well, good question. You can't divide what's under a square root with something that's not, right? Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, I see what you're saying. You could simplify 14 down further, and we can't, but yes, good point. If it was 12, we would have. So you're factoring by grouping. Now you pulled out whatever you could in this group. Now let's look at this group. Now I'm having people say we can pull out a 0 out of this group. But we can't pull out a 0. But we could pull out a positive 1. Positive 1, we could pull out a 1. So then left inside would be 3p plus 8. So first of all, in this group, you pulled out a 6p squared, right? So then you got 3p plus 8. And then in this group, if you pull out 0, then you divide each thing by 0. Can we divide by 0? No, so we had to pull out a 1. So now we pull out 3p plus 8. because it's safe. And then what's left? 6t squared. And then is it plus 0? Plus 1. So now setting that equal to 0, it's got to be that whole thing equal to 0. Does that make sense? So if you can't pull anything out, we technically will always pull out a 1.